My uncle had the kind of voice that filled a room even when you wished it wouldn't. We were halfway through dinner, turkey carved, potatoes passed around, cranberry sauce mostly untouched, when he leaned back in his chair like he was about to share some grand life wisdom. He jabbed his fork at his plate, then at me. "She raised that kid alone? No wonder he's weak." He said it like it was a fact. Not a question, not even an insult really, just a diagnosis. Cold, clinical, and loud enough that the whole table heard. I looked up, my hand frozen around my glass. My heart was pounding, but I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, because I knew exactly where this was going. Then his son, my cousin Brent, let out one of those smug laughs he's been practicing since puberty. "Maybe he'll grow up to be a waiter or something," he smirked, like that was the worst fate a kid could have. Like my 10-year-old son's future was a punchline. I felt the heat rush to my face. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I could feel every judgmental glance from past years crashing down on me all at once. Every backhanded comment about raising Micah alone. Every side-eye about how I chose this life. But I didn't say a word, because I didn't have to. Micah, sitting to my right, carefully set his fork down on the edge of his plate. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He looked thoughtful, like he was about to correct someone's math homework. Then he turned to Brent. Calm as anything, he said, "I'm building an app that makes more in a month than your dad's entire job." You could hear a pin drop. Grandpa Henry, who'd been sipping water, choked. Literally. Started coughing so hard Aunt Teresa jumped up to slap his back. Brent just blinked. His smirk disappeared so fast it was almost funny. Uncle Raymond opened his mouth like he wanted to say something back, but nothing came out. For once, he had no follow-up. Micah picked his fork back up and kept eating. And in that moment, the entire balance at that table shifted. It had been 3 years since I sat at that table. 3 years since I'd packed up the car with leftover pumpkin pie, an untouched bottle of wine, and my son in the back seat asking me why Uncle Raymond always looked at us like we didn't belong. I stopped going to family gatherings after that. I told myself it was because of work, or the long drive, or Micah's school schedule. But really, it was the quiet weight of their eyes. The way the room felt smaller when I walked in, like I was some story they whispered about when I left the room. I didn't want to feel that way again. But this year, Grandpa Henry called me personally, said Thanksgiving wasn't the same without me, said Micah was getting too big and he missed him. And maybe a part of me thought enough time had passed. Maybe things would be different. So I said yes. We drove down from Raleigh to Asheville the night before. I played old Motown tracks in the car while Micah sat next to me with his laptop open, typing code into a project I barely understood. At 10 years old, he already had a confidence in him I hadn't had at 25. He asked questions like, "Do you think I should scale the back end now or wait for more traffic?" And I just nodded and told him to trust his instincts. He's always been different, quiet but sharp. The kind of kid who listens more than he talks, but when he talks, people stop to listen. He was born during the coldest winter I can remember. His father left before Micah turned 2. No fight, no yelling. Just one morning, the sound of drawers opening and a note on the counter that said, "I'm not cut out for this." I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with a bottle of formula in my hand and Micah crying in his crib. I remember thinking, I have to be strong because no one else is coming. And I was. I learned code during his naps. I worked overnight gigs fixing broken websites. I built my freelance business from scratch. I held us together when nothing else did. But none of that mattered to my uncle. To him, I was a failed daughter, a failed woman, a mother who couldn't keep a man. He never said it directly, but he didn't have to. It was in the way he said my name with that tired sigh. The way he asked, "Still doing that computer thing?" Like I was still playing on a hobby blog instead of running a 6-figure tech business from home. And Brent, his son, was the golden boy, quarterback in high school, now a freshman at some out-of-state university, full of borrowed confidence and barely hidden disdain. He looked at Micah like he was a stray cat someone brought inside. The last time we were all in the same room, Brent told Micah that real kids don't play on laptops, they play football. Micah didn't say anything then either. He just turned away and kept reading. So walking back into that house for Thanksgiving was like stepping onto a familiar battlefield, one where the rules never changed. The living room still smelled like lemon polish and old wood. The same family portraits lined the wall, except now there was a new one of Brent in a graduation cap taking center stage on the mantel. Grandpa Henry greeted us at the door with a hug that lasted too long. He smelled like old spice and pipe tobacco, and when he saw Micah, his eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "You've grown a whole foot," he said. Micah smiled politely and said, "Almost exactly 4 inches." Dinner was already being laid out. Aunt Teresa waved me toward the kitchen to help, but I knew what that meant, chopping onions while she asked pointed questions about my love life. I declined with a tight smile and guided Micah to the dining table instead. He sat down next to me, pulled out his tablet, and tapped away while the rest of the family shuffled in with steaming platters and too loud conversation. Uncle Raymond arrived last. He wore the same blazer he wore to every holiday and a belt with his name engraved on the buckle. Brent followed behind him, phone in hand, typing furiously like someone important. They barely looked at us as they sat down across the table. As we passed the food around, the small talk started. Aunt Teresa talked about her garden. Brent bragged about his midterms. Raymond made a joke about participation trophies, then chuckled at his own punchline. I sat there smiling, nodding, answering politely, but I could feel it, that same slow crawl of tension under my skin. Micah was quiet, focused on his plate. I could tell he was uncomfortable. He doesn't like loud rooms. He doesn't like being interrupted, but he was trying, for me. I took a sip of water, forced myself to smile again, and reminded myself why I came. I came because I wanted them to see Micah for who he really is. I came because I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But I was wrong, and everything was about to prove it. The first half of dinner was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that's heavy with history, packed with years of things unsaid. Plates clinked, forks scraped. Conversations floated around the table like leaves blown in random directions. I focused on Micah. He sat straight, napkin in his lap, carefully portioning his plate the way he always did. Small bites, each item spaced apart like pieces on a chessboard. I could tell he was trying to stay focused, to keep from being distracted by the noise or the people. I whispered to him once, asked if he was okay. He gave me a quick nod, not looking up from his food. Uncle Raymond was already 3 drinks in when it began. He pointed his fork at Micah's tablet sitting beside his plate and said, "Still letting him bring toys to the dinner table?" His voice was light, but the message was sharp. Brent chuckled and looked up from his phone long enough to smirk. I didn't say anything. I just placed my hand over Micah's tablet and slid it closer to me. He didn't flinch. He kept chewing, calm and composed. Then Raymond kept going. "I just don't understand this new parenting thing. No discipline, no boundaries. You let kids do whatever they want and then wonder why they grow up soft." He said it to the room, not to me directly, but everyone knew who he meant, the same way they always knew. Aunt Teresa cleared her throat and changed the subject to cranberry sauce, but the air had already shifted. Brent jumped in next. "I had this professor," he said, "who said that kids without a strong male figure are way more likely to fail, like statistically. Dropout, depression, bad social skills. Makes sense, right? You need a real role model." He looked right at me when he said it. I felt my chest tighten. I took a sip of water and placed my hand on Micah's shoulder. He didn't look up. He didn't react. But I knew he heard it. Then Raymond leaned back in his chair and said it. "She raised that kid alone? No wonder he's weak." My breath caught. My fork hovered over my plate, suddenly heavy in my hand. I looked around the table. No one said anything. No one told him to stop. They just sat there, eyes glued to their food, as if silence made it less cruel. And just when I thought it couldn't cut any deeper, Brent added, "Maybe he'll grow up to be a waiter or something, or like manage a GameStop." He laughed, not even a nervous laugh. It was a full, smug chuckle, like he was proud of it. My hands shook under the table. Every part of me wanted to speak up, to slam my hand down and scream that they didn't know us, that they didn't get to talk about my son like that. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of biting my tongue. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the quiet strength I saw in Micah's face as he calmly set down his fork. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Brent. His voice was low, steady, and completely unfazed. "I'm building an app," he said, that helps kids track their chores and goals. It has over 20,000 users and made more last month than your dad's job pays in a year." The room fell dead silent. Brent blinked like he hadn't heard him right. Raymond opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Aunt Teresa froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. Even Grandpa Henry sat back in his chair and stared at Micah like he was seeing him for the first time. I watched my son as he picked his fork back up and continued eating like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just flipped the entire room on its head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was just telling the truth. Plain and simple. And that was the moment it all shifted. Because what do you say to a 10-year-old who builds something real while you sit back and judge him? What comeback do you have when the kid you called weak proves he's stronger, smarter, and more grounded than most adults in the room? Raymond looked down at his plate. Brent stared at his hands. The conversation slowly resumed, but the energy had changed. The air was thick with embarrassment, maybe even a little shame. Micah glanced at me just for a second. I gave him a small smile, and he nodded once, then went back to his food. That was the first time in my life I saw someone take control of a room without raising their voice, without anger, without any need to prove something. He didn't defend himself. He didn't fight. He just told the truth, and no one knew what to do with it. That dinner, I realized something important. The conflict wasn't just between me and my family. It wasn't about my choices or their judgment. It was about what happens when people underestimate the quiet ones, when they assume that strength only looks like loud voices, firm handshakes, and football trophies. Micah didn't just speak for himself that night. He spoke for both of us, and the story was far from over. After Micah spoke, the silence at the table hung heavy for several seconds. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from awkwardness or confusion. It was the kind that drops over people when something undeniable has been said. Something so clear, so true, that no one knows how to respond without admitting they were wrong. Brent shifted in his seat. His smirk was gone. He poked at the stuffing on his plate but didn't look up. Raymond didn't speak again for the rest of the meal, but it wasn't over for me, not really, because as proud as I was of Micah, so proud it burned through my chest, I couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. I had come dangerously close to staying silent while my son was humiliated. I had wanted to protect him by keeping the peace, and in doing that, I almost missed the fact that he didn't need my shield. He had his own. After dessert was cleared and people started drifting into the living room, I took Micah out to the porch. The cold air was sharp, but he didn't complain. He zipped up his hoodie and sat on the top step, watching the sky like he always did when he needed space. I sat beside him and kept my hands tucked between my knees. I waited, letting the moment stretch long enough to breathe. Finally, I said, "I should have said something earlier when they started talking like that." Micah glanced at me. "You didn't have to." "I did," I said. "I let it go too far. I'm sorry." He nodded, thoughtful. "You don't always have to jump in for me. I know who I am." There it was. So simple, so sure. I wanted to cry, but not from sadness. It was the kind of emotion that hits when you realize your child has already become the kind of person you hoped they'd grow into, the kind who knows his worth without needing permission to claim it. "You handled that better than I ever could have," I said. "I didn't do it for them," he replied. "I just didn't want you to think I was ashamed." That hit harder than anything Raymond had said at the table, because I knew what he meant. He saw the way I stayed quiet. He felt it in the moment I hesitated. And still, instead of being angry with me, he gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: reassurance. That night, as we drove back to the hotel, I made a decision. Not a loud, dramatic one. Not the kind you announce in front of the whole family. A quiet decision. The kind that lives deep in your chest. I was done playing small to keep other people comfortable. I was done shrinking myself to avoid making noise. And I was done pretending like their judgment didn't bother me. It did. It always had. But now I saw it for what it really was. Irrelevant. I had spent so many years trying to prove I was capable, competent, balanced. I answered their questions with polite smiles. I let their opinions echo without challenge because I didn't want to be the problem child. But all along, I was teaching them that their version of me was the truth. That ends now. The next morning, I got up early and made Micah pancakes in the hotel kitchenette. He didn't even look up from his laptop until he smelled the syrup. "Thanks," he said, sitting down at the little table. "I think I figured out how to fix the loading error. It's a cache issue." He started explaining it to me in his usual rhythm, words spilling out faster than I could track, his mind moving 2 beats ahead of the conversation. I didn't understand half of it, but I listened. I always do. Later that day, we went back to the house to say goodbye. Grandpa Henry pulled me aside before we left. "He's a special kid," he said. "Don't let them make you forget that." I thanked him, and I meant it. Grandpa was old-fashioned, sure, but he was also a quiet observer. He didn't always intervene, but he noticed everything. When Raymond stepped outside to wave goodbye, I didn't look away. I met his eyes for the first time that whole weekend. There was no warmth in his face, but there was no smugness either. He looked tired. Brent didn't speak. He stood by the car with his hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. As we drove away, I didn't feel regret. I felt clarity. I had let them say what they wanted for years because I didn't want to fight, but Micah showed me that sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean starting a war. Sometimes it just means knowing exactly who you are and saying it out loud. The turning point wasn't just what Micah said. It was the shift that happened inside me after. It was the recognition that my silence was never strength. It was survival. And I'm not surviving anymore. Micah had already crossed that bridge. Now it was my turn. We weren't going back to that table as the quiet ones anymore. We were standing by the front door, our bags packed and the rental car warming up in the driveway. Micah had his backpack slung over one shoulder, thumb tapping away on his phone. I was helping Aunt Teresa put away a few stray dessert plates when Grandpa Henry called everyone back into the dining room. "Just 5 minutes," he said, holding up a hand, "before y'all take off." We followed him, curious. The table was cleared now, glasses rinsed, chairs slightly askew from the shuffle of post-meal cleanup. Everyone gathered slowly. Brent slouched against the wall, Uncle Raymond folded his arms, and Aunt Teresa leaned against the doorframe with her usual tight smile. Grandpa cleared his throat and looked directly at Micah. "Kid," he said, "you said something yesterday. Caught us all off guard." Micah stood still, eyebrows raised slightly. Grandpa chuckled. "I almost choked to death. I won't lie to you, but I haven't stopped thinking about it." The room shifted. Eyes moved toward Micah again, but this time they weren't watching to ridicule him. They were listening. For once. Grandpa motioned to the end of the table where Micah had sat the day before. "Come here for a second. Tell us about this app you're building." Micah looked at me, and I nodded. He stepped forward, calm as ever, his voice clear. "It's called Goal Grid. It helps kids manage their routines. Chores, homework, anything they want to track. Every completed task earns them points. They can set rewards like screen time or treats based on their family rules." Brent smirked. "So it's like a chore chart?" Micah didn't miss a beat. "Kind of, but smarter. It connects to a parent dashboard, has built-in progress graphs, and uses basic machine learning to adjust goals based on performance. It also has weekly reminders and educational videos. We just released version 2.0. I'm working with a friend to translate it into Spanish next." No one interrupted him this time. Uncle Raymond shifted in his seat. "And you said it's making money?" Micah nodded. "Last month, it brought in about $18,000 in subscription revenue and in-app purchases. We've been in the App Store's top 100 for our category since October silence." Aunt Teresa blinked hard. Brent's jaw twitched. Even Grandpa took a second to let that number settle. Raymond's voice came quieter this time. "How is that possible?" Micah shrugged. "I built the first version with my mom's help. She used to teach me how to debug errors when I was 7. I run the front end and manage support tickets. We outsource customer service now. She helps with finance and legal stuff." I hadn't said a word up until now. I didn't need to. Micah's voice was strong enough for both of us. Grandpa looked at me, then back at Micah. "So you two built this together?" Micah smiled. "She taught me everything she knew until I knew more than that. Now we learn together." The pride hit me hard and fast. My chest ached in the best way. I hadn't expected to be spoken about like that. Not by my own son, not in front of the very people who had made me feel so small for so long. Raymond looked down at his hands. Brent rubbed the back of his neck. There was nothing else to say, but Grandpa said it anyway. "Well," he said, standing up slowly, "that boy's got more brains than this whole damn table combined. including mine. I don't care what anyone says. He's going to change the world. Micah didn't gloat. He didn't puff out his chest or throw a smirk toward Brent. He just nodded once and said, "Thank you." Then, without missing a beat, he added, "I already submitted the app for an education grant. If we get it, I want to start a version for kids in underfunded schools who don't have structure at home." A long pause followed, a different kind of silence this time, the kind that comes from people realizing they were wrong, and not just wrong, but small-minded, judgmental, outdated. Raymond muttered something under his breath and stood up. He walked toward the kitchen, not looking at anyone. Brent followed a few seconds later, his face unreadable. As Micah grabbed his bag and headed toward the door, Grandpa called out one more time, "Hey, Leah." I turned back. "You did good." I smiled, the kind that starts slow but settles into your whole face. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His words weren't loud, but they carried everything I had waited years to hear. Micah and I got in the car. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror and caught Grandpa standing on the porch, one hand raised in a slow wave. Micah opened his laptop again before we hit the highway. He leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning lines of code like it was nothing. "You okay?" I asked. He glanced at me. "I'm better than okay." So was I. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove, not to them, not to anyone, because the truth had already spoken. And this time, it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the boy they thought would never matter. And he said everything they needed to hear. The drive back home was quiet in the best way. Micah fell asleep somewhere around Hickory, his head tilted against the window, laptop closed on his lap. The early evening light poured across the dashboard, warm and golden. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting near his. For a long time, I didn't turn on any music. I didn't want to break the silence. I wanted to sit in it. I wanted to feel what peace finally felt like. Because for years, I had mistaken silence for peace. I thought holding my tongue meant strength. I thought not reacting made me the bigger person. I told myself that staying quiet meant keeping things calm, that it protected Micah from conflict. But the truth was, silence wasn't strength. It was survival. I learned to shrink myself in rooms where I didn't feel seen. I built armor out of politeness and endurance, not confidence. But Micah had never learned to shrink. He didn't explode. He didn't posture. He didn't raise his voice. He just told the truth with the kind of clarity most adults spend a lifetime searching for. He didn't ask for permission to be brilliant. He didn't flinch when they tried to reduce him. He corrected the record without losing control. And in doing that, he gave me something I didn't realize I had been waiting for. Permission to stop defending myself. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I felt a weight I hadn't known I was carrying finally slide off my shoulders. The house looked exactly the same as we left it. Clean porch, sagging swing, the solar lights flickering to life one by one. But something in me had shifted. I didn't feel alone anymore, because I wasn't the only one standing quietly in those rooms. Micah had been right there beside me all along, watching, listening, learning. And now, I saw clearly what I had built, not just in my career or in our home, but in him. He was the proof. I tucked him into bed that night, brushing his hair back from his forehead like I used to when he was little. He stirred slightly, then opened his eyes. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I'm more than okay." He nodded, already drifting again. "You didn't have to say anything back there. I knew you were proud of me." I sat on the edge of his bed and held his hand just for a moment. "I am proud of you, not just for the app, for who you are." He smiled with his eyes closed. "Thanks, Mom." And that was it. No dramatic speech, no lingering moment, just a quiet understanding passed between us. The next morning, I opened my laptop and stared at the desktop for a while. I thought about all the moments I let people define me, the times I brushed off their comments with nervous laughter, the years I stayed small to keep things easy. Then I opened a new document and started writing again. Not code this time, just words. I wrote about being a single mother. I wrote about raising a son who taught me how to be brave in ways I had never imagined. I wrote about every Thanksgiving where I swallowed my voice and how this year my son found his. I didn't post it anywhere. I didn't need the likes. I just wanted it out of me. Later that week, Micah got an email about the grant application. He got it. Full funding. Enough to hire a part-time developer and start a pilot version of Goal Grid for underserved schools. I watched him reread the email twice, then turned to me with a smile that stretched across his whole face. "Can we do it, Mom?" he asked. "Can we actually make this work?" "Yes," I said, "we already are." Since then, things haven't magically changed. Uncle Raymond hasn't reached out. Brent didn't follow up. But I don't need them to. They're not part of the future we're building. They were never the audience we needed to impress. The real win wasn't about silencing them. It was about showing Micah that he never needed their approval, that his value was never up for discussion, that our story could exist without anyone else's permission. People talk a lot about breaking cycles, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes the cycle doesn't break with a bang. Sometimes it ends in a 10-year-old boy quietly putting down his fork and saying what needs to be said. Sometimes it ends when a mother decides she no longer owes anyone an explanation. This Thanksgiving, Micah gave me more than just pride. He gave me my voice back, and this time I'm not giving it away. I'm giving. Thank you for listening to our story. If you're a parent doing your best or someone who's ever been underestimated, I hope this reminded you of something important. Your worth isn't measured by someone else's opinion. You don't need to prove yourself to people who never saw you clearly in the first place. The truth always finds its voice, and sometimes it speaks through the people we raise. If this story meant something to you, please take a second to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment, especially if you've ever experienced something like this. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about family, resilience, and finding your voice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's more to come, and I'd love to have you here for it. Take care of yourself, and if no one's told you lately, you're doing better than you think.